Leaf did not feel himself fall back into his body. He felt the world slam into him instead. Sound rushed in first, sharp and overwhelming, the quiet murmur of the gallery snapping back into place along with the soft chime of distant mechanisms and the faint shuffle of masked attendants. His lungs seized, dragging in air like he had forgotten how to breathe, and his knees buckled hard enough that he would have hit the floor if something hadn't torn the sphere from his hands at the same instant. The glass orb left his fingers. The vision shattered. Leaf stumbled backwards, barely catching himself on the edge of a display case as his boots caught on the thick carpet. His heart hammered violently against his ribs, loud enough that for a moment he was certain everyone could hear it. Valentin stood silently over him with the cosmos held carefully in both gloved hands, as though it were something alive and irritable rather than a flawless sphere of glass and light. The galaxies within still swirled, but their frantic collapse had slowed, settling back into distant, patient spirals. That, Valentin said quietly, is quite enough of that. He turned and placed the encapsulated cosmos back onto its velvet cradle, adjusting it with deliberate precision until it rested exactly as it had before. Only then did he straighten, lifting his gaze towards Leaf with something closer to concern than irritation. "You are fortunate I intervened when I did," Valentin continued. "Most who touch it do not return so cleanly." Leaf swallowed. His mouth felt dry as if he had been breathing dust. "Cleanly?" Jackson echoed, already moving closer. "That looked messy." Juno was there a heartbeat later, one hand gripping Leaf's shoulder, steady and grounding. "What happened to you?" Leaf didn't answer right away. His eyes were still fixed on the orb, watching the stars move as if they might rearrange themselves back into something recognizable, something inevitable. Dorian stepped in closer as well, studying him carefully. "Your pupils were fully dilated. You weren't reacting to sound. If that was a vision, it wasn't minor." "It wasn't supposed to be," Valentin said mildly. "The cosmos does not show people what they want. It shows them what they could be." Leaf's jaw tightened. Gabriel crouched slightly in front of him, trying to catch his gaze. "Hey, you with us?" Leaf blinked. Once, then again. His eyes finally shifted, landing on Gabriel's face, then Dorian's, then Juno's, who had gone very still, shield angled slightly forward as if instinct had already labeled the orb a threat. "I'm here," Leaf said, voice rougher than he intended. "Just needed a second." Juno's grip on Leaf's shoulder tightened slightly. "What did you see?" Leaf shook his head immediately. Too fast. Too sharp. Nothing useful. Jackson stared at him. "That is objectively not believable." "I saw weird cosmic nonsense," Leaf said, forcing a thin half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Stars, hallucination stuff, exactly what you'd expect from sticking your hand into a bottled universe." "That thing doesn't give abstract nonsense," Dorian said quietly. "It gives narrative, cause and effect. You don't look like someone who just watched pretty lights." Leaf met his gaze this time, held it, then looked away. "I didn't see anything." The words came out colder than he meant, and he felt it land wrong the moment it left his mouth. Dorian straightened slightly, studying him. "We're not trying to interrogate you. We need to know if that artifact showed you something connected to what we're dealing with." Leaf dragged a hand down his face, fingers pressing into his eyes for a moment before he lowered it again. "It didn't show me anything useful about masks or churches or Xavier," he said carefully. "Nothing that helps us right now." That was technically true. Seberic didn't speak, but his gaze stayed fixed on him, sharp and searching in a way that made his skin itch. Valentin folded his hands behind his back and regarded Leaf thoughtfully. "It would not surprise me if it showed you something personal rather than political. The cosmos has a particular fondness for unfinished business." Leaf shot him a look. "You sell this thing to people?" Valentin smiled faintly. "No, I keep it away from them." Jackson crossed his arms. "Maybe start putting little warning labels on the pedestals. Do not touch, may reveal your doom." "You mean like that?" Valentin said dryly, pointing to a black placard that read, "Do not touch," directly under the orb. "Oh, yes, exactly like that," Jackson replied sheepishly. Dion shifted closer to Leaf, lowering his voice. "If you need to talk later, Dion is available. Dion is a great listener." Leaf huffed a quiet breath that might have been almost a laugh. "I'll keep that in mind." Valentin cleared his throat softly, reclaiming the room's attention. If we are quite finished traumatizing ourselves with cosmological artifacts, perhaps we might return to the matter of why you are here. Jackson glanced between the orb and Leaf. Right, business. Normal, relaxing business. Valentin gestured gently down the gallery aisle. Shall we? As they resumed walking, the masked attendants continued their silent movements around them, rearranging relics of fallen eras with the same calm efficiency as before, utterly indifferent to the fact that one of the visitors had just stared into something that probably should not be stared into at all. Leaf followed a half a step behind the others. His fingers still felt cold. Behind his eyes, the image lingered. A throne, a crown that fit far too well, and a smile he hadn't known he was capable of wearing. They had not gone far when Dorian slowed, his attention snagged again by the soft mechanical rhythm of turning gears. The clockwork oracle called out to him from across the gallery, rotating slowly on its stand, brass plates shifting in elegant, precise alignment. The faint glow of the orb set into its helm pulsed once, as if in quiet awareness of being watched. Dorian stopped. The others noticed immediately. "You're thinking about asking it a question," Jackson said. "I am," Dorian replied without looking away. Valentin, who had been leading them toward another wing of the gallery, turned with a knowing lift of one brow. "Few resist that one for long." Dorian finally looked at him. "You said it answers one question per day?" "Yes," Valentin said. "One. Cleanly. Truthfully. No riddles, no poetry, no interpretive dance." Jackson clicked his tongue. "Well, that takes all the fun out of it." Cassian studied the armor, eyes narrowing slightly. "And the cost?" Valentin's smile returned, thin and polite. "For you, a single gold coin." Dorian exhaled slowly and reached into a pocket. "I can pay." Valentin regarded him for a long moment, then inclined his head. "Very well. One question. Choose carefully." Juno crossed her arms. "We should decide together." Dorian nodded, agreed. They gathered slightly closer, voices dropping out of instinct rather than necessity. "We could ask about the church," Jackson offered. "The blood moon, resurrection schedule, evil project timelines." "Or about the masks," Juno said. "Where they are, who's wearing them." Siberic shook his head. "Too broad. The thing only gives yes or no. We waste it if we ask something that needs explanation." Cassian folded his arms, gaze distant. "We could ask if Adrian is already compromised." "That's not a bad idea," Gabriel said. "But if the answer is yes, what do we do with that in the next 2 days?" They fell into silence, each of them circling different priorities, none of them fully aligning. Dorian listened. Then, quietly, he said, "There is something I need to know." They turned toward him. "Well, as you know, my brother didn't just die," he continued. "Not the way people are supposed to. His soul fractured. It was torn. Whatever the demon did to him wasn't normal magic, and it wasn't just murder." Juno's expression softened slightly. "Dorian, if this demon Azmakel is tied to the masks, to Xavier, to this larger system of rot," Dorian continued, "then that changes everything about how we approach him, and how personal this already is." Cassian studied him. "You think the demon is connected to your brother's condition?" "I don't think," Dorian replied. "I suspect. I want answers from him, and I want to know if my brother's soul can be saved. He will tell us before we end him." Valentin had not interrupted, but now he spoke, voice gentle. "That is a question the Oracle can answer." Jackson looked between Dorian and the armor. "You're really going to burn your once-a-day cosmic yes-no machine on that?" Dorian met his gaze calmly. "Yes." No one argued further. He stepped forward. Up close, the armor was more unsettling than impressive. Tiny gears shifted beneath overlapping plates, precise and tireless. The orb within its helm glowed softly, like a patient eye waiting to be opened. Valentin moved to the side. "Speak clearly, it will only answer what is asked." Dorian drew a steady breath. Then he spoke. "Is the demon Azmakel connected to my brother's soul being fractured from his body?" The armor stilled. The turning of its stand halted. The gears inside its joints froze mid-rotation, as though time itself had paused around it. Then the orb in its helm flared brighter. A low, resonant tone filled the air, not loud, but powerful in the way deep water is powerful. The armor's mouthplate parted. "Yes." The word did not echo, it landed. Juno's fingers curled slowly against her shield. Cassian's eyes closed for half a second. Jackson let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, that is deeply unpleasant confirmation. Dorian did not move. His jaw tightened, but his expression remained composed, as if he had already been carrying this truth and the Oracle had merely removed the last excuse to doubt it. Valentin watched him carefully. You chose a question with consequences. I chose a question with clarity, Dorian replied. The orb dimmed again. The gears resumed their slow, patient turning, as if nothing momentous had just been spoken. Juno stepped closer to Dorian. We'll deal with him, she said. Whatever that demon did, he will answer for it. Dorian nodded once. He will. Valentin folded his hands behind his back, and now you know that your hunt intersects more threads than you realized. Unraveling these threads will attract attention. Everything we do attracts attention, Jackson said. At this point, we might as well be efficient about it. Valentin smiled faintly at that. Shall we continue? Valentin had just begun to turn away when Jackson cleared his throat. Loudly. Not dramatically, just enough to be impossible to ignore. Before we go any farther into the objects that should not exist, Tor, Jackson said, nodding back towards the harp, we should talk about the fire instrument that is very obviously flirting with me. Valentin's mouth twitched. Flirting is such a mortal word for destiny. That thing is not destiny, Jackson replied. That thing is badass. He had already drifted back toward it, unable to help himself. The harp's onyx frame caught the lantern light like still water, and the ember strings pulsed faintly, as though responding to his proximity. Dion leaned in, squinting at it. If it burns you, I smash it. It will not burn, Valentin said mildly, unless you are an unworthy musician, of course. Comforting, Jackson gulped. Juno studied the instrument with a more careful eye. What is it? Valentin approached, resting one gloved hand lightly against the iron stand. Old, he said. Older than this city. Possibly older than the church's current memory is willing to admit. Jackson blinked. That feels like important context. It is rumored, Valentin continued, to have been forged during the age of St. Havel, when the great houses still believed compromise could bind the world together, when faith, magic, and mortal will were treated as equal pillars. Dorian's head lifted slightly. From the time of peace and balance. Yes, Valentin said. From the same era that birthed the artifacts that you are seeking. Jackson stared at the harp, eyes wide now. So you're telling me that this is not just a very dramatic stage prop? No, Valentin replied. It is not. It sings to him, Gabriel said quietly. I can feel it. Valentin looked at him. That is surprising. Jackson swallowed. Okay, then I would like to officially state that I would like to purchase the ancient magical artifact of probable world-saving importance. Valentin did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his hand and gently plucked one ember string with a gloved finger. The sound that followed was not loud, but it was perfect. Not sweet, not mournful, honest. It lingered in the air like breath held just a second too long. Even Dion went quiet. Valentin withdrew his hand. It is not for sale. Jackson's shoulders sagged. Of course it's not. Some things, Valentin continued, are kept not because they are profitable, but because they are dangerous, or because selling them would alter events in ways even I do not wish to be responsible for. Jackson rubbed his face. We just saved your supply chain. That has to count for something. Valentin turned to him. If your information proves accurate, it will count for a great deal. Juno straightened. Then make the deal conditional. Valentin regarded her with mild surprise. You are direct. We don't have time to not be, she retorted. Valentin studied them, one by one. Then he smiled, slowly, thoughtfully. Very well, he said. If my people confirm that Sylvanas' remaining stock is where you claim, and recoverable, then I will reconsider my stance. Jackson's eyes lit up. Reconsider as in I will sell it to you, at a price that reflects gratitude rather than rarity. Dion clapped once, delighted. Diplomacy! Jackson grinned. You hear that? I might actually get to own the fire harp of destiny. Valentin's expression remained polite. I would not grow attached just yet. Jackson placed a hand over his heart. Sir, I am already emotionally invested. Dorian glanced back at the clockwork oracle. If the harp is from the same era as the artifacts, then it was built with purpose, Valentin said, interrupting. Whether that purpose aligns with your goals remains to be seen. Juno nodded, which means we don't walk out of here with it tonight. No, Valentin agreed. But you may yet walk out with hope, which is far rarer in my experience. Jackson leaned closer to the harp, lowering his voice. Hang tight, gorgeous. I'll be back in no time. The harp did not answer, but the ember strings flickered just once, like a wink. Without realizing, they had made a loop through the gallery and were approaching the front entrance, moving through the last front room full of antiquities. The masked attendants moved aside as the party passed, silent as ever, robes brushing marble like shadows with purpose. So, Jackson muttered under his breath, we came in looking for answers and left with emotional trauma and a shopping tab. Cassian shot him a look. Focus. I am focusing, Jackson replied, on not touching anything else that might rewrite my destiny. Valentin stopped near the main doors, turning to face them once more. My people will verify your information swiftly, he said. If Sylvanas' store remains where you claim, I will send word. To the Codex, then, Dorian said, turning to the party. Juno turned her head toward the host. We'll be back. I expect you will, Valentin replied. The doors were already opening when Dion slowed. Not by much, but just enough to fall a half step behind the others. Juno and Cassian were mid-conversation about routes to the Umbral Codex. Jackson was still glancing backwards at the harp with visible regret. No one noticed at first when Dion stopped entirely. Valentin lifted a single finger toward the attendants, halting them, and waited until the rest of the party had passed beyond the threshold. Then he turned. Yes, he said calmly. What troubles you, warrior? Dion shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how enormous he was in a room designed for elegance. I was wondering, he began, then stopped, then cleared his throat. Thinking. Valentin waited. If someone wanted to give a gift, Dion continued, voice quieter now, to someone who is strong and stubborn and kind and does not think of herself as any of those things. Valentin's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. A romantic interest? He supplied. Dion's cheeks went red. Yes. Valentin folded his hands behind his back. Does this person know of your feelings? Dion hesitated. I sang a song? Won a contest? Valentin considered this. And did this song include her name? Yes. Then she knows. Dion exhaled equal parts relief and terror. Good, that's, good. Valentin gestured toward a nearby case, darker than the others, its glass etched with fine silver runes. I may have something appropriate, he said. He unlocked it with a small, careful key. Inside lay a hand mirror no larger than Dion's palm, its frame wrought in intricate silver filigree curling like vines around the oval glass. Tiny runes were carved into the back, so small they looked more like decorative flourishes than words. Valentin lifted it delicately. This is not an illusion mirror, he said. It does not alter appearances. It does not flatter. It does not deceive. He held it out. When someone looks into it, he continued, they see what they truly love. Not what they desire, not what they fear. Love, in its clearest form. Dion stared at it like it might bite. That seems scary. Valentin smiled faintly. Love often is. Dion swallowed. Does it always show people? Not always, Valentin replied. Sometimes it shows moments, places, paths not yet walked, but it never lies. Dion took the mirror carefully, like holding something sacred. How much? Valentin studied him. A magic item like this is not cheap. I am asking 450 gold, but I am feeling generous today. 400 for you. I will pay. Valentin smiled broadly. Then it is yours. Dion pulled out his small leather pouch of gold and then hesitated. What if she looks and doesn't see me? Valentin regarded him for a long moment. Then you will know, he said gently, and knowing is better than wondering. Dion nodded, jaw set. Dion prefers knowing. He tucked the mirror into the inner pocket of his bag, hands suddenly unsure of what to do with themselves. Thank you, he said sincerely. Valentin watched him go, expression unreadable. By the time Dion reached the street, the others were already waiting near the corner. Jackson squinted at him. Why do you look like you just bought a dragon egg? Dion shrugged. Maybe I did. Cassian sighed. Can we go now? They turned toward the deeper districts of Braxia, where spires grew closer together and lantern light dimmed beneath layered bridges and narrow balconies. Behind them, the doors of the collector's gallery closed with a soft, final click. They found the Umbral Codex easily across town, and it did not announce itself with grandeur. No towering facade, no banners, no guards in polished armor. It hid. Wedged between two leaning stone buildings on a narrow street where the lanterns burned low and the air smelled faintly of wet ink and old rain, the Umbral Codex looked like a forgotten municipal office that had been quietly losing funding for centuries. A single iron door, a plaque so worn it was nearly illegible. Dorian leaned close enough to read the faint etching. This is it. Jackson frowned. I was expecting more drama? Libraries that survive political purges don't advertise, Cassian replied. Inside, the air shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier, like stepping into a room that had absorbed too many secrets and never let them go. Tall shelves rose immediately on either side of the narrow entry corridor, packed with tightly bound volumes, scroll tubes, and stacked folios wedged wherever space allowed. The scent of parchment, glue, dust, and something faintly metallic clung to everything. Somewhere deeper within, pages rustled. Not from hands turning them, from the building settling, as if though even the walls were leafing through memory. They followed the corridor until it widened into a circular chamber dominated by a central desk that looked like it had been repaired more times than anyone could count. Behind it sat Elmira Voss. She was small, hunched slightly forward, wrapped in layered shawls that had once been richly dyed and were now the color of smoke. Her gray hair was pulled into a severe knot, kept in place by two bone pins shaped like quills. Half-moon spectacles rested low on her nose. She did not look up when they approached. Close the door, she said, voice thin and unimpressed. Draft ruins the vellum. Cassian turned and shut it gently. Only then did Elmira lift her eyes. They were sharp, uncomfortably alert, the kind of gaze that measured posture, breathing, and hesitation all at once. You look like trouble, she said. Are you trouble? Jackson gave a polite half-wave. It's been a troubling week. Elmira snorted softly and turned back to the ledger in front of her. State your business. Dorian stepped forward. We were told you could help us locate suppressed records related to pre-Crimson Sun church artifacts and the historical disruptions tied to... She raised one finger. He stopped. She scanned their faces again, this time lingering, eyes catching on Juno's shield for just a fraction of a heartbeat. Then she sighed. Don't bend, rip, tear, or burn any paper. Oh, and don't bleed on anything, she said. Beyond that, I don't care what you read as long as you put it back where you found it. That's it? Jackson asked. Elmira finally looked up at him fully. Do you want a sermon or a map? A map? She stood with surprising ease for someone who looked one strong wind away from folding in half. West Stacks, she said, pointing with a crooked finger. Religious schisms, heresies, and inconvenient saints. Then she pointed the other way. North Stacks, pre-collapsed noble registries, artifact provenance, and confiscation logs. Then toward a spiral staircase vanishing upward into shadow. Upper archives, personal journals, suppressed testimonies, anything the church labeled as poetic fiction, and quietly buried. And the really bad stuff? Leaf asked. Elmira paused, peered at him over her glasses, and gestured downward. In the basement. But that requires a reason and supervision. Cassian nodded. We'll start above. Of course you will, Elmira muttered, already turning back to her desk. Split naturally, a pair and two trios drifting into different corridors of shelving, footsteps muffled by old carpets whose original colors had long since surrendered to time. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Juno and Cassian found themselves wading through brittle ecclesiastical records, brittle ink cracking under their fingertips as they traced references to vaults, relics, and expeditions that ended abruptly without explanation. Look at this, Juno murmured, passing him a ledger. Artifact relocations listed, and then nothing. Whole pages torn out. Cassian frowned. Deliberate. Elsewhere, Dorian and Gabriel navigated the upper stacks, climbing narrow ladders to retrieve journals written in looping, personal script. Jackson wandered until he stopped wandering and started reading, perched cross-legged on the floor beside a stack of slim volumes on early Fey Accords. Leaf, meanwhile, gravitated toward the dimmer aisles without quite meaning to. He scanned spines without reading titles, fingers brushing the leather and wood, and bindings stitched from things that were definitely not leather. His mind kept circling back to the vision in the sphere, the throne, the smile. He forced himself to focus. Eventually, fatigue set in on the whole group. Eyes burned, necks stiffened. The sense that they were circling something important without quite catching it grew heavier by the minute. They reconvened near the central chamber, surrounded by small stacks of books and scrolls they deemed potentially useful. "So far," Jackson said, "we have evidence of missing artifacts, suspiciously vague death records, and multiple references to things being removed from official narrative." "That's not nothing," Gabriel said. "It is also not enough," Dorian replied. Elmira, without looking up from her desk, spoke. "Things removed from records end up downstairs." Cassian exhaled. "The basement, then?" She tapped her pen once. "The basement." They turned toward her. Elmira finally pushed back from her desk and stood again. "Come," she said. She led them down a narrow side passage they hadn't noticed before, shelves packed so tightly that books had begun lying in horizontal piles on top of vertical rows. Juno was the first to notice the staircase. It hid behind a false wall of shelving, half obscured by stacked folios and rolled maps that hadn't been touched in years. The steps were stone, worn shallow by centuries of use, and the light above did not reach far enough down to show where they ended. Elmira pulled a lantern from the wall and led them down a curling stone staircase into a cramped basement full of collapsing shelves and scattered paper. There was a musty odor clinging to the air like a weighted blanket. The ceiling was low, and the light from her lantern bounced around the room, exposing the mountains of parchment. She set the lantern on a table and went to a nearby shelf and pulled a slim, black-bound ledger free, and then another, and then a thick folio that thudded heavily when she placed it on a nearby reading table. "Start there," she said, "and don't rush. The Codex punishes sloppy readers." She turned and headed back towards the stairs and was quickly out of sight, muttering as she went. "This is where things go when they're not supposed to exist," Dorian murmured. Juno moved slowly, fingers tracing labels written in careful old script. Confiscated objects, pre-edict. Expunged treatises. Archive tier black. Recovered vault contents, uncatalogued. Her pulse ticked faster. She stopped. "Here." She pulled free a narrow volume wrapped in cracked leather, its title barely legible. First Age Armaments. Restricted compilation. Dorian leaned closer. That has to be it. They cleared space on a low stone table and opened it carefully. The pages were thin, dense with meticulous notes and sketches, diagrams of construction methods, annotations in multiple hands. Juno turned page after page, eyes scanning, breath slowing, as the pattern emerged. "Here," she said again, softer this time. A heading marked in heavier ink. Artifacts forged by the great houses during the First Age. Below it, a list. Not poetic, functional. The Shield of Dawn, bulwark against corrupted soul-bound magic. The Infernal Harp, harmonizer of discordant will. The Ember Crown, amplifier of infernal magic. The Gilded Lance, a righteous staff of judgment. The Oath-Sworn Gauntlets, bindings of the unbreakable covenant. The Requiem Cloak, veil between life and death. The Fang of Maledictus, executioner's blade against immortal corruption. Together, the vestiges of light and darkness. Juno swallowed. "These aren't symbolic," she said quietly. "They were built to fight something very specific." Gabriel's voice was low. "They were built to make sure the balance was kept." Dorian shifted uneasily. "These sound incredibly important." "They are," Gabriel replied. "That's why they were hidden." Juno's gaze lingered on the list, on the familiar name she already carried. "So the shield was never meant to stand alone," she said. "It was part of a set, a strategy." Jackson threw his hands in the air. "The harp is right here, in Braxia. I had my hands on it." "It's not a bad thing. That means we can quickly gather 2 of these items. We're off to a great start," Dorian said quickly. Across the basement, Cassian had drifted toward another shelf. He hadn't been searching for weapons. He had been searching for something else. He stopped abruptly, fingers tightening around the edge of a thick, dust-heavy journal bound in dark red leather. The title was stamped faintly along the spine. Personal Writings, House Strumhold. Restricted. Carefully, as if the book might react to being touched, he opened it. The handwriting inside was neat, controlled, scholarly. Kadrin Drumhold, son of the great Garrick and Eleanor Drumhold, librarian and historian of Kjlovania. Cassian whispered as he read. He scanned the pages for several minutes until he reached something that sent a shiver down his spine. Cassian? Juno said, noticing the change in him. He lifted his head slowly. There is a book in the mountains, in Castle Drumhold. It's locked away. This says it's Xavier's journal. This says it clearly documents his descent into madness and undeath, how he split himself and what he did with the masks. He turned the book so they could see. We need to find this journal. It could be the key to undoing everything that he has set in motion. Dorian stepped closer, eyes scanning the page. Why would they not just destroy this journal? Why would they keep it? They tried, Cassian said. It didn't work. Nothing worked. Cassian turned another page. At the end, there's a note about a vault, a private one, somewhere no church authority could reach at the time. Where? Juno asked. Cassian's jaw tightened. Castle Drumhold, he said, high in the Hollow Pass Mountains. The room went very still. Dorian exhaled slowly. That's Lycan territory, or what's left of it. And it's not abandoned, Jackson added. They never are. Cassian closed the volume. If this book still exists, then there may be more there. Records, failures, things he learned before the masks were even ever worn. Gabriel's expression darkened, which means the church, trying to resurrect him, isn't just repeating history. They're finishing an equation he already started, Dorian said. Juno looked back at the list of artifacts, then at the book in Cassian's hands. Artifacts to stop him, and masks that keep him anchored, and his own writings explaining how he did it. Her grip tightened on the table edge. Jackson exhaled shakily. So, to summarize our extremely cheerful afternoon, we need to collect legendary weapons, hunt demon generals wearing pieces of an immortal tyrant, and possibly break into a cursed mountain fortress to read the diary of history's worst decision-maker. Cassian met his gaze. Yes. Dion cracked his knuckles. Good. Dion hates diaries. Juno straightened, gathering the ledger, eyes steady now. We have what we came for. Let's thank our friend Elmira and get to the festival. We have a letter to deliver, and the night is young. They ascended the stairs in single file and found the historian seated in the same position she was when they entered the codex. She didn't look up as they filed past. Donations are welcome and encouraged. Someone does have to pay to keep this place looking sharp. She pointed at a small box with a slit in the top and a lock through a clasp on the front. The group paused and looked around at the absolute mess that was the library, then at each other. Jackson chuckled. That's a good one. That's my kind of joke. And he slipped several coins into the box. Thank you, ma'am. You were very helpful, Dorian stated quietly as they headed towards the door. In the street, with dusk now approaching, the sound of cheerful music and the chatter of a gathering crowd could be heard over the rooftops nearby. It's time for the Festival of Masks. Let's go, Juno said firmly. Weren't we not supposed to do all of this today? Jackson said smugly. I thought all of this in one day was going to be too dangerous. Sometimes it is better to plan to be safe and not follow the plan than to have no plan at all, Dorian replied thoughtfully. That almost made sense, Jackson said, rolling his eyes. Dion won a mask. And food. Dion's starving. He grinned as he said it. Okay, buddy, we'll get you both, Gabriel replied, laughing. The 8 adventurers made their way towards the Festival of Masks as it unfurled into Braxia's night, with a lighter step than they woke up with that morning. Hope was not a strategy, but for the first time since their fight began, they felt like they were gaining on their adversary.